Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, good afternoon. Nice to be back again. So today we'll be talking about plagiarism. Before I begin, I think there were certain questions which were asked yesterday. If those people are online right now, I request them to raise their hands at the end of the talk, and then they can ask the question and we can have a discussion on that. Okay, so let's start today's lecture. So, you know that last class we had talked about scientific misconducts, which were fabrication of data and falsification of data. So today we'll be talking about plagiarism, which is also considered one of the big three scientific misconducts these days. So before I begin the lecture, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Praveen Chadda, who is a well-known expert. Of course, he's a well-known scientist. In the first place, he was in DAE, and then he was director of my institute, UGC DAE CSR, and I had the good fortune to learn a lot of things from him. And also, of course, the University Grants Commission had brought out last December a volume called Academic Integrity and Research Quality, which most of you might have already downloaded from the UGC website. So this volume contains a lot of articles by acknowledged experts in the field of science ethics. And so I encourage all of you to read download this volume and read it also. Okay, so we move ahead and we discuss what is plagiarism is all about and what are the pitfalls which you face when you come across plagiarism. And you might remember last time I had told you that while in the first two scientific misconducts which were given there, fabrication and falsification, they are just perpetrators of these two scientific misconducts. But in the case of plagiarism, we also have an identifiable victim. So, what is plagiarism? And according to one definition, plagiarism is just the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, words, without giving appropriate credit. So, as I said, in plagiarism, there is a very clearly identifiable victim whose credit has been stolen. And plagiarism can occur during the writing up of the research report when due credit is not given to earlier research publications, and it violates ethics during the publication process. There are certain instances where plagiarism can occur even after writing up of a research report, which is totally out of the hands of the author or even a reader. So, UGC, University Grants Commission, had actually published a gazette. They brought out a gazette on academic integrity. This was a couple of 3 years ago, in July 2018, in which they have listed out a number of points where, apart from academic integrity, there's a full section devoted to plagiarism. And as per this gazette of the UGC, plagiarism means the practice of taking someone else's work or idea and passing them as one's own. So this was the definition given by the UGC Gazette. So what are the different types of plagiarism that one encounters? So when a plagiarism of another person's words, phrases or paragraphs occur, it may be termed as text plagiarism. So when you say another person, of course it's not your own plagiarism. That is called self-plagiarism. So this kind of a text plagiarism is most often found, and it can be discovered or noticed using currently available software in the market like Authenticate or Urkund and many other such Turnitin and things like that. But of course, one can also notice plagiarism just by reading a text also. Okay. If you are reasonably an expert in that field and you're well aware of the literature which exists in the field, you can even find out plagiarism just by reading certain articles which are plagiarized. But depending on software, could be a little dangerous sometimes, because the software, of course, it's not a human being, so it simply uses certain algorithms to detect repetitive words. Like the standard algorithm is that when you find at least 7 words in a line which are similar to those which have been written in a previously published article, so that is flagged immediately as plagiarism. But there could be quite a number of issues because a number of times softwares actually have failed to detect plagiarism, and there are a number of times where the software has in fact detected as declared as plagiarism when there was none. So one has to take these softwares with a pinch of salt, but the problem is that most of the publishing houses, they use these softwares. Not only that, even UGC has decreed that certain softwares should be used to detect plagiarism, especially when you submit a PhD thesis or a dissertation. Now, regarding text plagiarism, there could be also issues like when you have many publications in which large amounts of text has been copied and pasted without giving proper credit, they are retracted. Now there are also watchdogs like Retraction Watch, PubPeer, and Better Science and things like that. There are certain groups of people, and some of them are, of course, non-scientists also. And so their sole business is to ferret out plagiarism. And of course, it gets noticed very much when the person involved happens to be a very high-profile person. So, of course, without saying this text plagiarism or all kinds of plagiarism is absolutely unethical, and it constitutes a very serious scientific misconduct. Then there's another kind of plagiarism. Sometimes this can be quite serious. This occurs when an individual's scientific ideas are plagiarized. And this can be termed as idea plagiarism. Now, the problem with this idea plagiarism is that the plagiarism check softwares which you use, and they're quite expensive. In spite of paying all that money, they cannot detect when ideas are plagiarized. So, probably, softwares, as I said, are not philosophical by nature. So, to scientists, plagiarism of an idea strikes at the heart of research as a creative enterprise. So, this was actually mentioned in an article which appeared in Nature in 2014. Now, there's a third form of plagiarism, which is called self-plagiarism. So, what happens here? Suppose you have certain phrases or passages which get repeated in subsequent publications of the same individual. So this can be termed as self-plagiarism. And when does this occur? See, this can occur even unintentionally also and intentionally also. So suppose you are an individual who is pursuing a complex connected series of research problems where you go on publishing papers in a sequence. Then, of course, sometimes unconsciously you can repeat certain phrases or terms which you have used in your previous publication in your next publication because it's a natural continuation of a research problem. So, but of course, the software doesn't realize that part and it will flag it down as a self-plagiarism. But there could be also intentional self-plagiarism, that also is a possibility. So when does this happen? This happens when you do not give a proper reference to your earlier work. Okay. So the best policy would be that even if you refer copy terms from your own publications, just refer them that these were published earlier by you, and this will help in your continuing contribution to the field. And self-plagiarism can also occur quite often when you happen to present results in a conference. Usually in a conference, you present a summarized version of your results. And then consequently, you publish them in a journal. But these days, even conferences are tracked by all software and plagiarism software as well as watchdogs. So you must be careful in what you're presenting in a conference and make sure that in case you have presented a result in a conference and then you're publishing a part of it or whatever in subsequent publication in the journal, you must, of course, without fail, refer to this presentation in a conference, however small it may be. Because these days, once something is put up on the electronic media, it is accessible to everyone or across the globe. In fact, one interesting thing I could tell you that once I published one of my results in our newsletter, in my institute's newsletter, which has, of course, a very limited physical publication, but it was on internet. So another research worker somewhere in the United States or somewhere, he happened to be working on the same compound and did the same experiment. And of course, he noticed this newsletter, my institute's newsletter in the internet, and he was, of course, very honest enough to refer to this newsletter in his paper. So that means his conduct was very ethical and he gave due credit when it was required. So one must be very careful about even results which are presented in a conference or even if you are putting them up in your institute's newsletters. And you must consider that as a dissemination of your result and refer to it when the opportunity comes. Now, as I said, this plagiarism need not be just in written form. Suppose a scientist, he makes a detailed presentation of a very novel idea which he has picked up from someone else. And that someone else was not really aware of that this guy has actually picked up his idea. And if he makes a presentation of that idea without referring to the person who suggested this, or he might have even overheard that person saying this idea, and if he doesn't give that person appropriate credit, then he would be simply leading the audience to believe that he was the originator of that idea. So this can also be termed as plagiarism. And so plagiarism can happen in several ways, which can have, of course, quite different kinds of consequences also. And again, going back to this point about presentation in a conference, you find that, especially this happens in India, that many of our research scholars who attend conferences, see, I believe that our research scholars are second to none. They also have excellent ideas, novel ideas, but out of respect or even out of awe for a big scientist, they happen to meet in a conference, if they start talking about their ideas, and if that other reputed scientist is not an ethical person, he can even steal your idea just because you were discussing with him. So now what could be the different ways which plagiarism can now happen, and what could be different consequences? These were some instances which I found, which were published by Miguel Roy in Office of Research Integrity. So this first example was a historian who had to resign from the Pulitzer Prize board after allegations that she had actually appropriated text from other sources in one of her books. A writer for a newspaper, probably a journalist, he was found to have plagiarized material for some of his articles, and he ended up resigning his position. Then there was a biochemist who had to resign from a very prestigious clinic after accusations that a book he wrote contained appropriated portions of text from a NAS report. And this can happen even in music. A famous musician was found guilty of unconscious plagiarism by including elements of another musical group's previously recorded song in one of his new songs, which became a hit. So he was forced to pay compensation. Then a college president was forced to resign after allegations that he failed to attribute the source of material that was part of a college convocation speech. As simple as that. And then politicians, lesser said about politicians, the better. The senator had his master's degree rescinded after findings of plagiarism in one of his academic papers, and he had to withdraw from the election race. And similarly, some minister somewhere had to resign her position after a university rescinded her doctoral degree for plagiarism. And similarly, there was a psychologist who had his doctoral degree rescinded after the university found that portions of his dissertation had been plagiarized. So the consequences can be quite hard when you get caught, when you plagiarize something, when you indulge in plagiarism. So why do people plagiarize? So this is a very interesting question. Probably it's a philosophical question because there are no clear answers. See, competitive research basically is all about creating new knowledge. And you cannot create the same knowledge twice over. So you will be either the first person across the line to publish some novel idea, or if you are not the first person, then you will be an also-ran. And then if you're an also-ran, then it becomes all the more difficult to publish your work in a high-impact journal, which always looks for novelty in your research work. And this in turn can cause problems in completing your degree on time. So the resultant effect is a mad scramble to be the first to publish in this age of cutting edge research. And very often it is this kind of a scramble which gets people into a lot of trouble. So because of this kind of a pressure, people fall prey to temptation and they adopt devious and unethical methods to obtain publications. And these pressures can be several. Okay. So sometimes, of course, this can also become like a pathological disease and can give rise to an assumption, say that once a plagiarist, quite often a plagiarist. And then sometimes lack of confidence in one's own skills. This could be different kinds, like maybe you have a language problem, you're not so okay, there are some comments coming in, but of course we'll try to address these at the end of the lecture. The comments straight away at this stage. So this lack of confidence in the skills could be language. Suppose you come from an area which does not have English as a spoken language. It could be India, it could be Europe, or anywhere else, where there are a lot of people who don't have English as their mother tongue. So people may find it very difficult to express themselves in English. And when one has to write a publication, say in English, and if you are also working under, say, some pressure like time or something like that, then the temptation to copy from an already published paper is quite high. So this is one of the reasons. You can also have a lack of confidence in your own research capabilities and abilities. This can also pressurize you to plagiarize. Then poor time management. So if you are working under certain time schedules or time limits, and then if you are unable to complete the assignment on time, then automatically you try to resort to looking into already published data or already published articles and try to draw upon them and then write it as your own. So you can always refer to these earlier publications, which will always save you. So this kind of pressure is also a very reason which is cited very often. Then this other kind of pressure, like which is called publish or perish. So this is another pressure which acts on people a lot. Not much in India, but definitely in the West, there's a lot of pressure to publish in a given tenure track time or something like that. So this also can induce people unnecessarily to resort to plagiarism. Then, of course, you can have rank laziness as one of the reasons to undertake complicated research, which can cause people to force people to plagiarize. And of course, there are people who are the racing drivers, I would say, just for the thrill of it, and the thought that, yes, I cannot be caught, I will not be caught. Just for that kind of a thrill, they may just go in for plagiarization. Then, of course, you can plagiarize, plagiarism can also result because of very poor paraphrasing or missing out on citations quite unintentionally. So that also can give rise to plagiarism. So what are the levels of plagiarism? So degrees of plagiarism. So UGC in its Gazette has brought out certain specific values for this. They go from level 0 to level 3 in order of severity, where level 0 pertains to similarities up to 10%. So they are considered as minor similarities where there is no penalty. Then level 1, where you have similarities about 10% to 40%. And then level 2, where the similarities are between 40 to 60%. And level 3, where the similarities are above 60%. So they have actually written down various penalties for these levels from 1 to 3, which increase in the degree of severity. Yeah, I will discuss that a little later. So while UGC has declared these levels of plagiarism, which are of course relevant to people in our here who are going to submit their thesis at some point of time. So they will have to conform to these standards set by UGC. Of course, internationally, different countries and different organizations or societies, they have also brought out different levels of degrees of plagiarism. And one example I show here is that of IEEE. IEEE is a very well-known body for engineering sciences. So here, of course, they go in the reverse way, where level 5 is actually the least plagiarized level. So and level 1 happens to be the most the worst part of the plagiarization. So in level 1, what it means is that you have uncredited verbatim copying of a full paper or verbatim copying of a major portion of the paper which is greater than 50% of the original paper. Then to a lesser degree is level 2, where the uncredited verbatim copying of a large portion, and this denotes less than 50% of the original paper. Then you have level 3, where you have uncredited verbatim copying of individual elements like some paragraphs, sentences, or figures. Of course, when I say paragraphs, if it happens to be in the range of level 2 or near 50%, it goes to level 2. Then we have level 4, which is uncredited improper paraphrasing of pages or paragraphs. And then level 5 is the credited verbatim copying of a major portion of a paper without clear delineation. See, what do you mean by saying without clear delineation? So this is level 5 plagiarism, which is not a very serious plagiarism. Here, what you have done is that you have given credit to a certain earlier work which was published by copying a certain passage or whatever from that work. And you did give, of course, refer to that work. But when you do a verbatim copying of a passage from a previous research work, it is now decreed that you must attach quotes to this verbatim copied passage. That means if you take a certain sentence or a paragraph from a previous work, and even if you give a credit by referring to that work, you have to enclose this in quotes, or you give an indent saying that this is actually taken from a previous work. So that is the correct way of actually giving the credit to a verbatim copy of a passage. So these are the different levels of plagiarism which have been proposed by different bodies. And of course, we stick to our UGC, which has given this kind of a degrees of levels of plagiarism. So what are the punishments for plagiarism? And mind you, when since you're all mostly students who are working for your PhDs, this can be a very serious thing, and it may result in an ultimate cancellation of your registration. So let's go through this for dissertations and thesis, which is most relevant in this lecture. The level 0 refers to similarities up to 10%. So they are very minor similarities and they're condoned and there's no penalty. Then we have level 1, which is similarities between 10 to 40%. In such a case, the student is asked to submit a revised script within a stipulated time period, which does not exceed 6 months. So if you are found to have plagiarized between 10 to 40%, you will be asked to revise that particular script within 6 months and resubmit your thesis. When you have similarities between 40 to 60%, which is level 2, so that particular thesis will be actually debarred from submitting a revised script for a period of 1 year. So if the level of your plagiarism is between 40 to 60%, you will have a cooling period of 1 year, which is very bad because usually PhD students, they submit their thesis almost at the fag end of their tenure. So if you have a 5-year tenure for your PhD, for the last 6 months or 3 months or 4 months goes into submitting a thesis. And at that stage, if it's found that your thesis contains a plagiarism or degree level 2, then imagine that you will have to wait for 1 full year before you can resubmit a revised script. And of course, the worst of all, level 3, if the similarities go above 60%, such a student registration is cancelled. And that is the worst which can happen to a student. And I think keeping this in mind, you may well do to be extremely careful about your work, and you take help in case you are unable to find out whether you're unconsciously plagiarizing any other work. So I really advise you that you must be very careful about your thesis. See, if it's a question of a paper, it's a different ball game altogether. Because here your thesis doesn't come into the picture at that point of time. You're just simply trying to publish a paper, and even if, God forbid, there is a plagiarism there, then at the most what can happen is that the manuscript gets rejected, and even if you have published that manuscript, it will have to be probably retracted. So as far as your thesis or dissertation is concerned, my sincere advice to all of you is that please be aware of these things. See, I can tell you about my own experience. When I was a student, we had never talked about plagiarism. We didn't even know what it was, at least at the level of PhD thesis and things like that. And there were no such checks also. There were no such softwares available also. And so that was a different age. And so that is why it's all the more important for you that you must be careful. And even if you are able to get away, you have plagiarized and you have been able to get away at this stage, I can show you some earlier, some references later where people have been caught much, much later in their careers, and they had their PhD degrees revoked. So that kind of penalties can result. So my sincere advice to you again, please be very careful about plagiarism, and be very conscious about this. So, of course, for the publications part, UGC has also given certain rules, and here the supervisor is also involved, where in a publication similarities of 10%, of course, no penalties as a minor similarity. Then between 10 to 40%, you'll be asked to withdraw the manuscript. And between 40 to 60%, you'll be asked to withdraw the manuscript. You'll be denied a right to one annual increment. So this is for the mentor or the supervisor or the faculty. And you shall not be allowed to be a supervisor to any new master's or MPhil's PhD student for a period of 2 years. And that can be sometimes fatal for the research work. And then, of course, the worst thing is that you have similarities above 60%. Number one, you'll be asked to withdraw the manuscript. You'll be denied a right to 2 successive annual increments. And you shall not be allowed to be a supervisor to any student for a period of 3 years. So these are quite severe for even faculty also. So I think this is a very good thing which UGC has come up with, so that people are made aware of these issues and problems. And so it may be really useful on part of everyone, both students as well as their supervisors, to take care about this issue. Okay, now I just describe some case histories where how plagiarism has been caught out. So this was an article which was published in a journal called IJACSA. I think it's a journal for software or something, data science. So there were authors who published this paper in this journal. Then there was a person who noticed this paper and he wrote to the editor of the journal, and I quote, "Few days ago, I came across a data science article titled A Data Science Framework for Data Quality Assessment and Inconsistency Detection, published in your journal, so and so volume, and I'm extremely upset to discover that there are almost all the sections, algorithms, and even plots which are unoriginal and deliberately copied from a previously published work of mine." So actually this person, he was a student and he had submitted a master's dissertation, I think in Canada. And somehow this landed with these authors, and they simply lifted whatever was there in that dissertation and simply published it as their own work. So now you can see the editors immediately worked on this, and they have actually given this retraction after careful and considered review of the content of this paper by a duly constituted expert committee. This paper has been found to be in violation of this journal's publication principles. We hereby retract the content of this paper. Reasonable effort should be made to remove all past references to this paper. So this paper has been retracted. So that, of course, gave a closure to the person who was affected. Okay, but it's not always that you can achieve a closure. Okay, sometimes you achieve only a partial closure, or sometimes you may not even achieve that. Then there was another paper which was published in an MDI Gurgaon journal. See, these journals, quite a few of these journals are predatory journals, which I will talk to you a little later. So this was published in this journal of business perspective called Vision. And it was termed as Psychology of Green Entrepreneurship, Environmentally Sustainable Organizational Climate in Small Scale Companies in India, by some Bhavin Das, something, something, etc. An Indian byline as well as a foreign byline. So this was noticed. Actually, the original authors, they had submitted a manuscript to a journal, and before that could be published, this particular paper was published. So it's not clear how these authors got hold of that manuscript at its review stage itself. So at the review stage itself, this manuscript came to be plagiarized. And fortunately, it was noticed by the original author, and he immediately wrote to the editor. And then within 2 days, that was a very fast response, they got an apology letter from the first author in that paper, and he writes, and look at his words: "Respected Sir, Madam, my name is Babin Das, and I requested Professor Mayer and Moon to assist me in getting a paper published in Vision, his journal. The paper's name is Psychology of So and so, so and so. I'm a PhD student in India, and I needed a publication in order to submit my thesis. I am the first author of the manuscript, and I admit that I obtained the paper in an unethical manner, behavior made by myself only. I did not write the paper, but I told my co-authors, whom I requested to assist me in publication process, that it was my work. I lied to them and may have gotten them in trouble. They have only assisted me so far, and I apologize for my mistake in this issue. None of the co-authors was aware of my unethical behaviors. I will immediately request that the paper be retracted from the journal. I apologize my mistakes. Kindly forgive me." Now, this is a very atrocious way of admitting guilt. And also, I'm pretty sure that the other authors, probably one of them is his supervisor, and he has forced him, in fact, to write this confession. That would be very well possible. So this is another kind of case where you are caught out. See, if this person had not been caught out, he would have gone ahead and, of course, got his PhD also based on this paper. And then I referred to another paper by my earlier mentor, Dr. Chadda. So here was a paper published in Physical Review B, which referred to a certain passage, which is there in highlights. The direction and magnitude of the shielding current for any change in the external magnetic field is assumed to be such so as to minimize the change of the total flux contained in the sample. Now, this was a sentence, or this particular statement was in fact lifted from a previous publication, uh, which is given below, and they had to issue an erratum later, okay, stating that the reference number 8 of P. Chadda, Bhagwat, and Ravi Kumar in Physica C, etc., is missing at the end of the third sentence in that section. And the third sentence should now read as so and so with reference 8 at the end. So this was again an attempt to assert credit for an idea which was published earlier. And if these authors had not been were not could not notice this missing reference, this could have simply gone on as his own idea. So this is one kind of unethical behavior. Okay. Then there was another case again of Dr. Chadda, where he had published in the DAE Solid State Physics Symposium. It's supposed to be his very first paper in 1975, and then published in Physica Status Solidi, which is not a very high impact journal. It comes from East Europe. And there was a person, McIntyre from Houston University, who had links with Argonne National Labs. He published this paper in Physical Review B, with a very similar wording or the property of angular broadening effects in Compton profile measurements without giving any credit to this paper published earlier in 1975 by Dr. Chadda and Sahni. So then he was again forced to give an erratum. Okay, then he wrote that it has been pointed out that some observations, see, he writes as some observations in the paper had been stated previously and appropriate references should be added. Now, observations this is a theoretical paper, so simply he should have actually written ideas here. Okay, this was an idea which was lifted from the earlier paper, but he writes it as observations. So that's how one erratum is published, and again, this person would have got away if the authors of the previous paper were not alert enough to notice this reference. Then there was another paper which was published again in Physical Review B in a very recent 2011. So again here, Rao happens to be a very big name right from the superconductivity days. I'm talking about condensed matter here. And Professor Rao uh, is a visitor who keeps coming often to India also. And so this person, he published this paper in which entire processes and ideas were lifted from another published work, which was way back in 2009. Now, they mentioned the entire words here, which was, in fact, this kind acronym CHUF called CHUF, which is cooling and heating in unequal fields protocol. That was coined by these authors here in this journal. So these people, they simply lifted this word without referring in any manner to this paper. So an uninformed reader who would read this paper would imagine, or he would come to the conclusion that these authors, Sarkar, Pralong, and Rao, have actually proposed this protocol, thereby denying credit to the original authors who had actually proposed this protocol. And imagine a person like Rao, who is a very highly reputed scientist in Europe or in the whole world, for example. He's the director of one of the laboratories. He was the director of one of the very big laboratories in France. So he had to resort to this kind of plagiarism of an idea. And so this is one instance where an idea itself is plagiarized without giving any credit. And again, here, when such people come to India and attend conferences, the general tendency on part of research scholars is that, oh, he's a very big man, I would like to go and talk to him. And then they start talking about their ideas. But mind you, these people have their ears open, ears and eyes open all the time. They are very sharp. They have all the means to do experiments, carry out experiments very fast. And if they come across an idea which they find useful, they can simply carry out that experiment and then publish it as their own. So now here there's another problem. So they did publish an erratum for their paper, saying that the authors did not cite a relevant and important reference, and this protocol that has been used was first published in this reference earlier, and we apologize for this omission. But then the problem is that in Physical Review B, this erratum appears much later and doesn't appear along with the original publication, the original problematic publication. So, for example, the original publication at some point of time had 25 citations, whereas the erratum has only 6 citations. So it is very difficult for people to notice that there was an errata published. So there is no closure. Even after there's an erratum which has been published by the offending author, there's no real closure here. So one way to avoid this is that this erratum, whenever people refer to this paper or whenever they try to download this paper, this erratum also should get linked and get downloaded along with this paper. So they are made aware that there was some kind of a hodgepodge which happened in this original paper. Then again, there was another more recent instance where again this person, Umetsu and Kainuma, are from two very big labs in Japan. We have the Institute for Material Research at Sendai, Tohoku University, and then we have Institute for Material Research at Tohoku University. So, so these two people, they of course wrote a paper on a very similar sample which was studied earlier by these authors here. And they also refer to this term, which was called kinetic arrest, which was referred to a very particular physical phenomena happening in these kind of compounds. And this term was referred several times in the paper, but they did not refer to the original papers which actually coined this term. So fortunately, the editor noticed this, and then he forced the authors to have additional references in the final print version. So the original references, they come out here as additional relevant references. But then these two people didn't stop at this, they went a little further. So once they found that they had a problem with this term kinetic arrest, then they changed the terminology itself and devised a different term, calling it thermal transformation arrest, while referring to the exactly same term of kinetic arrest. In fact, in the first paper which they published, they wrote thermal transformation arrest, which was called kinetic arrest in our previous papers. So they are referring to the same phenomena with a different name. So now apparently they want to avoid giving credit by using a different terminology for a same physical effect. Okay. So again, they try to change this in the title itself. So earlier they used to write kinetic arrest phenomena. Now they write it as thermal transformation arrest phenomena and try to avoid giving credit to the earlier papers. But again, if the referees are careful enough and they do a good job like they did here, they force the authors here to cite the original papers again. Okay. So now you can also have plagiarism by referees themselves, which is again a very atrocious thing to do. Okay. Here, there was an instance by a person from Tufts University in Massachusetts by the name Danziger. So they submitted a manuscript to a journal called Annals in Internal Medicine. And then they got a rejection from the journal saying that the external peer review, they decided not to publish the manuscript, and the manuscript was returned. Just a year later, this person, he found that he became aware of an article which was published in different journal, here, Exley Journal, which was almost identical to the manuscript which he had submitted to the Annals in Internal Medicine. So immediately he realized that, and his concern was that the reviewer who refereed his paper may have misappropriated the content of his manuscript, plagiarized the work and published it in a different journal called Exley Journal. So he wrote to the editor of the Annals, and who fortunately was kind enough to contact the other journal's editor, who again responded favorably, and they found out that yes, the very person who refereed the manuscript earlier when it was submitted to Annals was the same person who published in this journal. As a result of this, the people had to retract this particular publication. And this person Danziger became very famous for writing a very nice letter in that journal. So he titles it as "Dear Plagiarist, a letter to a peer reviewer who stole and published our manuscript as his own." And it's a very interesting article which I advise you to read. And maybe I can just read a few lines. I'm aware that you recently admitted to wrongly publishing as your own a scientific research paper that I had submitted to Annals. And after serving as an external peer reviewer on our manuscript, you published the same manuscript in a different medical journal a few months later. You simply removed the names of the authors and the research address and replaced them with the names of your co-authors and your institution. He says that to me, I mean, he implies that to him, it took 5 years of conceptualization of the study to publication of the primary analysis. And this study was my fellowship project and required a lot of work. It took efforts to find the right research team, design the study, raise the funds, get approval, recruit, and create material for study participants, run the diet classes. He was talking about the research methodology, which took him almost 5 years, and then almost 4,000 hours of work, and after which he submitted the manuscript, and he finds that he had been scooped by the referee himself. So this is again one kind of thing which can happen, and he also writes at the end, I hope you will not steal anyone else's research in the future, and instead perhaps there is some way you can assist the scientific community's efforts to reverse the growing epidemic of plagiarism and scientific fraud. Helping to raise awareness of the problem and identifying potential solutions would be a positive step in the right direction. So that was a very nice letter which he wrote after he found out the whole thing which has happened. So there's one way actually one can avoid this kind of plagiarism from occurring. That is, whenever you find that in your own analysis that you have a novel idea which you want to publish, it is all the while better that you publish in what are called condensed matter archives or bioarchives. So archives is one preprint repository where you can put your manuscript there to put the stamp of timestamp as well as your credit. So once your manuscript is there in the archives, then nobody can usurp your credit. Though you may not be able to publish that manuscript, even though you are not able to publish that article, and some others have managed to do that research work and publish, they will have to refer to this preprint in the archive which you have already put up. So your credit will remain unplagiarized or unstolen. So this was so now this kind of plagiarism has no it doesn't belong to any level of people. It's not that only students do this. It's not that just any faculty do this. Even very highly reputed scientists are also capable of doing plagiarism. And sometime in 2012, actually Nature has an editorial, and they write that over past 18 months, Nature has chronicled an epidemic of plagiarism involving prominent political figures in Europe. Among all these, they write Germany's defense minister who plagiarized material for his law thesis, some Hungary's president whose thesis on physical education contained plagiarized material, and some prime minister of Romania who continues to dismiss well-founded accusations that he plagiarized sources for his thesis. So this kind of thing can happen to even very big people also. So then how do you get closure? I mentioned about closure. See, complete closure would be that if there's a paper which has been very drastically plagiarized, then a complete retraction of the paper in which the plagiarization has occurred, that indicates a full closure to the author whose work or idea has been plagiarized. But again, sometimes in cases where there is just an erratum or an apology or a correction, there is really no proper closure, which I indicated earlier, since these errata or apologies or corrections, they appear much later and no one bothers about them. And this plagiarized paper would simply continue to get cited while this erratum goes unnoticed. And this also happened to me also when in one of my earlier lectures, I described one comment which I wrote on another published paper where they had some careless results analysis, etc. It so happened that my comment was published in a part of the journal where, like for example, Physical Review B comes out with 2 issues every month. The first of the month and 15th of the month. The first of the month refers to areas of magnetism, condensed matter, and things, transport properties, electronic properties, etc. Whereas the one which appears on the 15th of the month, that refers mostly to surface sciences and it's a slightly different field. So whereas my comment was referring to the journal which is supposed to be published in the first of month, the comment was actually published in the 15th of the month journal. So that has no meaning because nobody is going to see, the people in my field of research are not going to look at that part of the journal at all. So in a way, my comment probably would not be noticed by many people. Okay. So such plagiarized instances would continue to get cited while the erratum or a comment or the apology goes unnoticed. So the one possible solution is that whenever such a thing occurs, the journal must actually link the erratum to the main paper itself. So whenever you download that paper where plagiarization has occurred, the erratum also gets downloaded. So what is the solution? Solution is don't plagiarize and also protect yourselves against plagiarism. This is a very unethical practice. Please don't do it yourself. You may not get caught now if you do it, but it can happen later. And then the consequences will be very severe. Simply give credit wherever it is due. Don't pull back from giving credit. See, this is one thing which I have noticed during the course of my own career. That's why people in India, they have all kinds of biases and they don't like to give credit sometimes when it is due. So just give credit whenever it is due. And then also avoid self-plagiarism by giving proper references to your own work, earlier works. So because this issue can come back to you much later, especially when you're in a very senior position. And if you are a very bright young research scholar who has some out-of-the-box research ideas, you must make sure that you protect your intellectual property, that is your own ideas. Because if you are not careful about it, you may get easily usurped of your ideas, especially if you don't publish them in time. So please do not get scooped from this kind of a experience. So that's it for today, and thank you for your attention again. And now let us see if you have any questions. We can just go through any questions if possible. Yeah, I think there were quite a few questions last time also, and I request all those people, you can show the questions. And also, if possible, I request you to raise your hands in case you want to speak and ask any question. So if you raise your hands, our people here will be able to unmute you, and then you can ask your questions. Yeah. What is the UGC policy in writing thesis based on one's own publications? So this I have already told you. So when you write your thesis based on your publications, you must refer to your publications. Wherever you're writing the thesis, you must refer to the publications and give proper citation, references, and so that will be very clear when you actually cite your thesis, cite your works, and that comes out in the plagiarism checks also by the software. Yeah, there was one more quite a big comment which I had noticed. Yeah, can a perpetrator go scot-free by issuing an erratum without any penalty? Okay, now if the perpetrator happens to be in India, then of course he gets governed by the UGC rules. But if the perpetrator happens to be, and very often this is the case, if he happens to be abroad, what do you do? Okay, so here you need to be careful and then extract as much as possible from a person who's abroad. Okay, most of the perpetrators in the examples quoted by you resigned or were made to resign and not fired. Does it indicate absence of suitable legal framework to handle plagiarism? Uh, they were both. I mean, there were people who resigned, and what was the other word? Sorry, one second. Who resigned and then no, fired. Okay. No, there have been people who are fired also. I mean, absolutely, there's no doubt about it. In fact, I have shown you several instances earlier talk where people have been fired. And yeah, in case of self-plagiarism, the perpetrator and victim happens to be the same person. How can it be called unethical? See, when you do self-plagiarism, yeah, of course. It's not that I mean you're not. I mean you're your own victim, but here you have to give proper references to your work, because when you're writing something later, and the community, see, when you publish a paper, who's going to see this paper? They'll be your peer group. Okay, so your research will get validated only after you publish it, and after others actually go through this the research, uh, maybe again do the same thing and then validate your research. Now, when that such a thing happens, when you're addressing an audience who's outside your sphere, I mean your own lab, then they must know that whenever you're talking about some experiment or an idea, and if it happens to be predated, okay, then they should know that this was also predated. Okay, so it is essential that you refer to your own work. Okay, in the case of a self-plagiarism instance. And see, you may get another way of looking at it is that you may get a totally different a second publication just by plagiarism your own work. And if suppose there is, I mean, the journal feels that look, it is simply a copy of the earlier paper, and we need not give any. This is simply plagiarized version of an earlier paper. So that way, I think that answers that question, how you're the victim there, okay? Yeah, then sometimes due to high number of referencing, we start writing in a similar way of the papers we cited. Is it plagiarism? I think if I understand this question correctly, uh, we start writing in a similar way of the papers we cited. Uh, I wonder if this person is there, you can unmute yourself and explain again. I don't know. Sharmishta Chattopadhyay. I think what I understand from this is that that you have a set of earlier papers who you are citing, and then you are saying that because the large number of references, you are writing in the same way as what has been written earlier. Okay, I can give you one example. For example, you take a particular phrase of a particular process. Now, there'll be a limit to the way you can describe a particular process, say preparation of a sample. So there could be certain ways, a limitation on number of ways you can describe preparation of a sample. For example, I take the solid state reaction method. So what I do, I take the constituents, material constituents, put them in a platinum crucible or something, and then heat it at a certain temperature. So now this process will be the same for any paper which I will be writing. Okay, so so in that case, it's not going to be you cannot call it a plagiarism. Yeah. What are the softwares available to check one's manuscript for plagiarism prior to sending it in a journal? Uh, Actually, most of the softwares, okay, there are a number of softwares like Turnitin or Authenticate, Urkund, etc. They all do this job, but they are not free. Usually, your institute will be buying these softwares, and you can always run your software, your manuscript through this software. And this is now almost a mandatory requirement for many institutes, and even UGC has also mandated that this should be done, that you should run your manuscript through such a software and then find out whether what is the degree of similarities which the software gives. Yeah. Can we copy a full sentence from a paper after giving reference? You see, if you are doing a verbatim copying of the sentence, then you have to first put it in quotations or an indentation and also give the appropriate reference for that sentence. Is Turnitin the best software available for plagiarism check? Unfortunately, there is no best software available. They're all of similar kinds with slightly differing algorithms. And of course, I wanted to put that slide here with for the answer to the question you have asked, but I've not done it today. Maybe I'll do it later, if possible, in the next lecture. It's not really possible to completely depend on softwares, and there's no such thing as the best software. They're all can give equally similar results and equally variable results also. As I said, the same software can give different kinds of similarities at different times. It would be highly appreciated if you would include a detailed case study on at least one case from original publication to plagiarized one, then the process of detection and final punitive action, including the process followed in that case. Okay, I'll try this. If possible, I'll try to see whether I can get enough material for a detailed case study. See, what I have already described are quite similar, and the process is quite similar at even different countries. And of course, different journals have different policies. That's another thing. I mentioned this briefly in my earlier talk. Like even very highly reputed journals, they are very reluctant to admit that there is a problem, because it is their reputation also which actually comes into play, and they are sometimes very reluctant. They take years to admit that there has been a problem. And so you have to fight against all these things. And I also talked to you about the affair of the Baltimore case, I think, David Baltimore's case, where even after the Secret Service Department of the government stepped in, they had to finally reinstate the person, the accused person. And so this can, I mean, these processes can be very detailed, and I don't think probably this is the right forum to present such a detailed analysis of a plagiarism case. Maybe I'll try to see if I can present another one next lecture, showing you certain steps which are followed in the in the case, in a particular case. I'll try that. So, are there any other questions? Okay, I think there was some question last time which was referred to something about an XRD pattern. Anyway, I request, see, in case you have any particular questions, you're always welcome to write to me at my email address, and in case I'm unable to notice that question here or whatever, and I'll definitely try to answer the question in the next lecture. Okay, so yeah, you have written that if two researchers have the same XRD pattern and the same material, one communicated, not published, whether other can claim it against ethics. No, I mean, if I understand your question correctly, that you have two people, A and B, at different places, and you're working on the same material. This happens very often, and one person has already communicated the result, whereas the other person has not communicated. Is that correct, or I guess that is very standard and well known that we could be having several people working on the same material at the same time. So, as I said, the first person to cross the post wins the race. Can there be plagiarism by editor? Of course, why not? If the editor is an unethical person, it can all definitely happen. There's no problem. Okay. Yeah, definitely it can happen. How much percentage is allowed for self-plagiarism in the dissertation? No, that there is no differentiation between self-plagiarism or any other plagiarism by the software. Plagiarism is plagiarism. That's all. It will simply give you a similarity with the earlier work and say that you have this much uh, similarity with the earlier work. Okay, and what is allowed or not, that depends on how you have worded the reference, and the university or the institute feels that it is okay, and it will go through. So I hope I have addressed the XRD issue also, and okay, so if you have no more questions, and I request you again to write to me the questions so that I can answer them appropriately. Thank you very much.